Hello everybody. So today I wanted to talk about something that I think is absolutely fundamental and key to learning to become a better jazz musician, or a jazz musician full stop. And while there are other things to study, I think this is perhaps the most important thing. And we have a perfectly rubbish name for it, which is transcription. The reason why I hate the word transcription is it doesn't mean the same thing in classical music as it does in jazz, so that's one thing. As a definition, trans means from one thing to the other. Scription means you have to write, and that's really inaccurate on two levels. In classical music, transcription means simply taking a piece of music for one instrument and writing it out for another. So for instance, most of us, if we're interested in classical guitar, have played Bach transcriptions for guitar, either from cello, violin, or lute, for instance, okay? So, it's not a widely used term. In folk music, people wouldn't use I've transcribed this old folk song. They would say, I learnt it by ear and now I can play it or sing it, which is a more normal way of putting it. And I think we should use that term, ear learning, because it's more accurate. I only think that transcription has come into use as a term because people wanted to give it a mystique, an impression that it's more complicated than it actually is, but it's not. It's basically fundamental to how most people in the world learn music, okay? So, first of all, I wanted to talk about what we learn by ear, and an obvious example of that is solos. And the internet is full of solos that people have learned by ear and learned to play perfectly along with the record, and it's amazing. I'll talk a little bit about that later though, because it is, I think, quite a stereotyped idea of what transcription is. In fact, ear learning, as I should probably refer to it, is basically everything. So if you want to learn a song, then you learn it by ear. And I think in the days of like real books and all that kind of stuff, we tend to think of ear learning as being something we do for language and solos, things that aren't written down. And if you can get it written down in the omnibook or whatever, there's no point in learning it by ear. But actually, ear learning is always better. There's strong evidence to suggest this, actually, in the literature. So I've experienced it myself. I sit in on a jazz workshop as part of my masters that I'm doing at the moment in jazz music education generally, but obviously I'm interested in jazz. And they get the students to learn by ear. And when they learn things by ear, they always play better. When they're reading off a chart, it becomes a bit stiff and a little bit wimpy, not properly audiated, I suppose Edwin Gordon would say. Okay, so you should really learn tunes like, Autumn Leaves, Blue Bossa, all of that basic jazz repertoire right away should be learned by ear. And simple tunes like C Jam, Perdido, things like that can be very helpful in the early stages, right? So you're not asking your students to, or yourself, should you be the person starting to learn jazz, you're not trying to learn anything too hard. You're not trying to learn a Coltrane solo, for instance, right away. You have to build these things up, like you have to build your playing up, okay? Until you become a more and more advanced listener, and then maybe a virtuoso listener eventually. So that's really important, and I think a lot of people I've encountered, a lot of students I've encountered as an educator, often have like loads of solos they've transcribed, and to be frank, like buckets of language, but they often can't play any songs. You're like, well, can you play me, this well-known standard? I'll sing it to you, and they're like, ooh, So if they can't do that, there's something going wrong, I think, a little bit with the educational process. It just hasn't occurred to them to learn songs by ear. Well, we can start with that, and then maybe as we go along, work on solos. I think ear learning is fantastically important, and I think like the very word transcription makes the whole thing sound formal, like you have to do it for an exam or something, and I think that's very dangerous. Okay, so there's different ways of transcribing. There's three basic pathways. The one is fundamental, and the other two are up to your choice whether you choose to do them or not. The first one is that you have to hear something and be able to audiate it properly, okay? So the Tristano approach to jazz education, which has been going for 70 years, Rene Tristano is one of the first jazz educators. I think it's really codifying something that jazz musicians already did. If you read sort of, the sort of biographies of people like, Ray Brown and Charlie Parker and Wes Montgomery, which is to learn solos by ear. So how you do it is you just learn to sing a whole solo, Leslie Young solo, maybe to start off with, all the way through. And when you could sing it perfectly and you got all the notes right and all the rhythms right, you don't have to be a great singer, but you can tell when people are doing, when they know it. Then when you know it, you can try and play it on your instrument, okay? So that's Tristana School. So let's just move back to the ear thing, because I think this is really important. I think this is the fundamental number one thing that most guitar students get wrong, okay? So have a think about whether you do this yourself, because I think most of us do, to be honest. Okay. Do you try and play something on your instrument before you totally know what it is? And be honest with yourself. And I think, like, the very instrument, which is why I'm sat here without an instrument while I'm talking, is a distraction. If I had a guitar on my knee, and I was just playing it, then obviously this would be very distracting. And I think, like, especially if you're trying to work out a bit of music and you don't know quite what it is, but you're tempted to try and play it on the guitar already, that's gonna, that's gonna make you confused. It's gonna make you forget what you were trying to do. Okay, so I would suggest for anybody just to put their guitar down and listen to it again, listen to it, try and sing it along with the record. Is it right? Maybe not. Let's try it again. Yeah, I'm getting it. Okay, let's try it without. Can I sing it without? Maybe. Maybe I'll just check myself. Yeah, okay, cool. Right, I think I've got it. And then you pick up the guitar, right? And I think this will make you much less of a noodler and more intentional in your playing. It'll make you play with more intensity because you're playing things that you actually know instead of just moving your fingers about. Very important. I think the majority of guitar students I've seen could benefit from that. Now, if you're Lenny Tristana, you would say do that for a whole solo, okay? Which is pretty hardcore. So the next step is, do I do it on my instrument? And obviously, like on YouTube, there's loads of people who've done just that. They've worked out solos in great depth, they've technically mastered them, they play them flawlessly along with the record. It's very impressive, okay? So you've got to ask yourself, okay, so we've gone through the ear thing. I've actually learned how to hear this piece of music. So what is putting it on my instrument teaching me? Well, as you work it out, you're working out where the notes are on your instrument. You're kind of mapping the fretboard maybe. You're trying out a few different positions, seeing what works, working on fingerings, working on technique, okay, working on instrumental stuff. So I think a lot of guitarists, maybe other instruments as well, sort of get a bit stressed out about the idea of putting something that they hear on their instrument. But it's not that hard, like if you can really hear something in your head, you are gonna stand a much better chance of getting it right. Okay, the putting notes on your instrument thing, and people get obsessed with things like ear training, nothing wrong with that, but putting notes on your instrument is just a matter of experience, and the more you do it, the better you're gonna get, okay? So it's worth thinking about that. Also, I always find that if I can hear something, technically it presents less problems. There's something about the body just likes to adapt to do what it can hear, it's almost a miraculous thing sometimes. Like you find yourself playing faster than you thought you could. If you hear a really fast guitar player, then you're going to play faster. The ears are very powerful like that. Another direction which you can take, which you can also combine with the instrumental thing, is writing things down. Okay, so why would you want to write something down? As an aid memoir, perhaps? As an aid to analysing it, to working out what's going on in the music? We haven't talked about analysis yet. Perhaps you just want to get better at dictating music, so you get better at hearing music when you look at it. That can be useful too. Okay, so one of the fundamental things I think that musicians differ on, I think everybody agrees that ear learning is important. I just want to sort of point out that there's kind of a high level hearing that you can do as well. You don't necessarily have to go down into the depths and get all of the details. Sometimes it can be very beneficial just to listen to something and get the overall shape of it and work out, go, oh, he's doing that thing there, or, the phrases are getting longer, or, there's more outside or it's less outside, or there's a lot of pentatonics being used here. Just general observations about, the music can be very useful. You don't always have to go right down into it and work out every single note. So be aware that there's different levels of focus while you're doing this. Okay, and with that in mind, do you choose to do a whole solo or do you choose to do bits and chunks? Now, the whole solo thing seems to lend itself well to performance, and historical examples where before YouTube was invented, if you can imagine such a distant era, people like Charlie Parker and Wes Montgomery basically learned entire solos for performance almost. There was no school for learning jazz, so that's how most people learn. In the case of Charlie Parker, you can hear in his early recordings that he's very much quoting Lester Young lines and heads and so on. And if you listen to like early Wes Montgomery, he was actually just performing Charlie Christian solos verbatim for Lionel Hampton because he didn't think he could improvise. Okay? And so there's a tradition of that. Now, I used to think everybody who's any good did that, and that's not true. Some players prefer to focus on bits and pieces and chunks. You know, little bits of language that they can work with, for instance, you know, or just, something catches their ear, I want to know what that is, I want that, I want to work it out, you know? Okay? So that's something else to think about. Okay, there's a problem with speed. How fast do you have your playback? Now, I would say it's always better to have it at full speed because that's how fast music goes. Okay? If you have to slow something down to work it out, then you should ask yourself the question, is this something I really want to work out to be able to play it? And if the answer is yes, go and do that. If you want to work out what the general kind of harmony is, it's probably better to do that at full speed actually, because then you hear the whole gestalt, the whole shape of it in one go, like a chord. Okay? So that's the suggestions that I would make, but maybe something to be gained from doing it at half speed. Maybe you can hear how something might work in slow motion. I don't know. I don't want to say that it always has to be at full speed, but I found for myself I like full speed because it actually replicates how music is. So there's a question of analysis. Do you choose to analyze your solos or not? How do you choose to analyze them? Obviously, a lot of people are very interested in pitches, but maybe you could analyze rhythms. Maybe if you're writing down a solo, you have to ask yourself questions about how do I write down this rhythm? Maybe they're a bit behind the beat. Maybe they're a bit ahead of the beat. And what gets lost when you write something down? What is the omnibook, conversely, not telling you about Charlie Parker's music? It's things to think about, right? Okay. Analysis of pitch sets, note choices over chords. Do you choose to look at it in a chord scale way? I've done my theory on video. Do you choose to look at it in maybe more of a sort of, an old school sort of way? There's different ways to look at it. How are you analysing? All the rest of it. Vocabulary. Okay. A lot of jazz musicians, especially when they're learning, look to solos to get vocabulary, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's great to have licks, okay? I mean, it's good enough for Charlie Parker, it's good enough for most of us. Okay, so, but maybe actually your aim is not to learn vocabulary. Maybe your aim is to just get really good at hearing things and playing them back. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do at the moment. So, for instance, there's a video of me transcribing a Kurt Rosenwinkel solo somewhere in my channel. I'll link to it below. And I don't remember anything from that video at all. It's fine. I don't mind. I mean, I wasn't trying to learn Kurt licks. I just want to hear things and play them back as fast as I can. It's good training. And also, improvisation is about flexibility. I don't want to play Kurt Rosenwinkel stuff. I want to play my own stuff as I hear it in my head. And also, the benefit of listening to a great player like Kurt is it gives you ideas. You start hearing your own stuff. Particularly important, actually, is the idea that listening itself is a creative act. So if I listen to a solo, Kurt Rosenwinkel solo, whatever, you and I might hear different things that we like. And that's great. That's really important. That's one reason why I don't really like sort of, 50 gypsy jazz or 50 bebop lick books that show you what somebody else, whoever's written the book, likes. I think that's kind of like, well, take ownership for your own tastes. Your own tastes have value. You love music, form that emotional relationship with music. Don't be like, oh, well, I've got to learn this because otherwise I'm not a proper jazz guitarist. It's a load of old rubbish. Don't listen to those people, okay? Again, academia can be, because people have to teach a syllabus. Just saying. It's not necessarily the fault of the educators. Okay, right. Next thing, ear training. So people are really into ear training, some people. Ear training is like perhaps a way to get yourself better at transcribing. I think ear training is kind of a separate thing. I think ear training is about being able to classify pitches by ear. When I play stuff on my instrument, I'm not thinking, oh, there's a third, there's a fourth, there's a flat sixth. I'm thinking just like, oh, that's where the notes are on the guitar. Because that to me is just like a natural response. Now, some people might be just very good with written music and notation. They might also imagine a piano keyboard in their head. There's different ways to do it. But for me, it's just like, oh, that's where that note is on the fretboard. So ear training for me is just going like listening to something, and going like, yeah, I can classify that note in terms of stuff notation. It's a different path. So that would be help the ear to writing thing a lot faster. Now, what I think Mike Longo suggested is that he didn't like the idea of transcription being used as a way of getting licks. He didn't like the idea of it being used to get vocabulary. And I think beyond a certain level of your playing, he's absolutely right. He emphasised its value as ear training, and I think he's absolutely right. It's about getting yourself in touch with the instrument and being able to hear phrases in your head. And I really like that way of looking at it. But if you need licks, nothing wrong with licks. Okay, so I wanted to talk about lastly tradition. And the great thing about transcription is it kind of stops you from floating around, to use that horrible word, ear learning. The great thing about ear learning is it stops you floating around in this kind of disassociated world where jazz seems to be some branch of like higher mathematics, and it starts saying, oh well, Charlie Parker played that phrase, it's like, oh well, I know that one, oh, but that actually goes back to Alphonse Picot and New Orleans, and he played that line on High Society. Okay, oh well, that's interesting. So like just by listening to different recordings and paying close attention to them, you can build up an idea of the history of the music and how phrases pass from one person to another. I mean, if you just listen to that phrase, you might think, well, it's basically sort of pentatonic, isn't it? But actually it has a much more interesting life to it than that. So being part of the tradition and being interested in it is a lot of fun, and I've got an enormous amount out of it. It's made jazz, for me, a lot less dry, and maybe it will for your audiences as well. So I hope you found that useful, and let me know any thoughts you have below. It'd be interesting to see who tends to transcribe one way or another. I might do an online poll and find out what your thoughts are. Thanks for watching. Bye.